My sister ruined my wedding dress on purpose right as the ceremony was about to begin, and the worst part wasn't the wine. It was the way she smiled afterward, like she had simply corrected something that never should have belonged to me in the first place. And I stood there in the bridal suite with my hands trembling slightly, not from shock alone, but from the sudden clarity that this was never an accident, never a clumsy spill, never a harmless mistake, because Zoe had always known exactly how to hurt without leaving fingerprints, and she did it with the elegance of someone who expects the world to forgive her before it even questions her, and the deep red stains spread across the white fabric like a secret finally visible. While outside the door I could hear guests settling into their seats, soft laughter floating through the hallway, the string quartet tuning up, unaware that my big day had just been sabotaged by the person who was supposed to stand beside me, and Zoe's voice was syrupy when she said, "Oh my God, Lily, I'm so sorry," but her eyes were bright, too bright, like she was watching something burn that she had been waiting years to light, and my mother rushed forward with a gasp, pressing napkins against the stain as if panic could erase intention, while Elaine, my best friend, stood frozen near the mirror, her mouth slightly open because she saw what I saw, the smug calm behind Zoe's apology, and I stared at my sister. My own heart beat loud in my ears, and I whispered, "You did that," and Zoe's smile twitched for half a second before she widened it again, performing innocence. "Lily, don't be dramatic. It was an accident." Accident. The word she had used my entire life whenever she took something from me. Whenever she broke something that mattered, whenever she made sure I understood that her chaos was always forgiven and my reaction was always the problem. And my mother looked at me sharply, pleading, "Not today, please," because family pieces always demanded from the one bleeding, never from the one holding the knife, and Zoe let out a little laugh that sounded like sympathy to anyone who didn't know her. "Honestly, you were so nervous. I tried to help, and my glass slipped." And she lifted her hands in a helpless gesture, the picture of regret, but her fingers were steady, not shaking, and I remembered every moment that led here, every small cruelty wrapped in sweetness. Every time she competed with me for attention like love was a limited resource, and today love was dressed in white, and she had decided I didn't deserve it, and I took a slow breath, forcing my voice calm because I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me unravel. "Get out," I said quietly. And Zoe's brows lifted, offended. "Excuse me?" And I repeated, firmer, "Leave," and my mother's eyes widened in horror. "Lily, stop." But Elaine stepped forward then, her voice sharp, "Zoe, go," and Zoe's expression hardened for the first time, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the resentment underneath. "Fine," she said softly, leaning closer so only I could hear. "It's not like anyone wanted you to look perfect anyway." And then she turned and walked out of the room like she had done me a favor, leaving behind the smell of spilled wine and the echo of humiliation. And my mother started crying. "What are we going to do?" And the wedding planner hovered in the doorway pale-faced, whispering about timing, about guests waiting, about the aisle, and I looked down at the ruined dress, at the stains soaking into fabric that had cost months of savings and a lifetime of dreaming, and for one wild moment I wanted to collapse, to scream, to call everything off. But then I thought of Zoe's smile, the way she would tell this story for years, the way she would twist it into proof that I was fragile, that I couldn't handle pressure, that she was the composed one and I was the mess, and I realized this wasn't just about a dress, it was about control. About her needing to stain my moments so she could feel clean, and I straightened my shoulders slowly, wiping my tears before they could fall, and I said, "We're not canceling," and my mother blinked, "But Lily." And I cut her off gently. "We're not canceling," and Elaine's eyes met mine, understanding dawning. "What are you thinking?" she whispered, and I looked into the mirror at myself, at the red stain like a wound, and I spoke softly, "If she wants to embarrass me, she'll have to watch me walk anyway." And the next 30 minutes moved like a blur, seamstresses rushing, fabric pinned, a lace shawl pulled strategically, the stain not gone but hidden enough for the dress to still be a wedding dress. And when the music started outside and the doors opened, I walked down the aisle with my head high, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I refused to be broken in public, and Zoe sat in the second row beside my parents. Her face arranged into fake concern, but her eyes flickered when she saw me standing tall, because she hadn't expected that. She wanted collapse, and as I reached the altar and took my fiancé's hands, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet promise forming beneath the vows, not of revenge screamed in anger, but of consequence delivered with patience, because Zoe thought she had ruined my wedding dress. But what she had really done was reveal herself in the clearest possible way, and 2 weeks later, she would understand that stains don't disappear, they spread, especially when the truth finally touches them. The wedding ended with applause and photographs and carefully edited smiles, but beneath every congratulation the stain still lived in my mind like a bruise you keep touching just to confirm it's real, and Zoe played her role perfectly at the reception, floating between tables with tearful eyes and soft apologies, telling anyone who would listen that she felt horrible and that she couldn't believe her hand slipped, and people nodded sympathetically because society is trained to forgive the person who speaks first, especially when she looks composed, and my mother clung to her all night as if protecting her from consequence was part of the celebration, while my father avoided my gaze entirely, and I danced, I laughed, I cut the cake. I let the day happen because I refused to give Zoe the satisfaction of watching my life stop, but when the music faded and the guests finally left, exhaustion hit me like a wave, and in the quiet of our hotel room I stared at the dress hanging in the closet, the hidden stains still there like a secret between me and my sister, and Elaine sat on the edge of the bed with her arms folded, her face tight with the kind of anger she had held back all day. "That was not an accident," she said finally. And I exhaled slowly, "I know," and Elaine's eyes sharpened. "Then why is everyone acting like it was?" And I gave a small bitter laugh, "Because it's easier," and Elaine shook her head. "No, Lily. It's convenient," and she leaned forward, voice lower. "Zoe wanted you humiliated in front of witnesses," and the word witnesses sent something cold through me, because humiliation is never just cruelty when it has an audience, it's strategy, and I swallowed. Strategy for what? And Elaine hesitated, then said, "For what she's been planning," and my pulse quickened. "Planning," I repeated, and Elaine reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. "I didn't want to tell you tonight," she said, "but after what she did, you deserve to know," and she scrolled, then turned the screen toward me, an email subject line visible. "Urgent family estate meeting," and my stomach tightened. "What is this?" And Elaine's jaw clenched. "This came to your mother's inbox yesterday," she said. "I saw it when she asked me to print something before the ceremony," and my throat went dry. "Estate meeting," I whispered. And Elaine nodded. "Zoe has been meeting with your parents behind your back," and the room suddenly felt smaller. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt, and Elaine replied carefully, "Your grandmother's trust," and my breath caught, because my grandmother's trust was the reason I had stability, the reason I could afford this wedding, the reason Zoe had always looked at me with something sharper than jealousy, and Elaine continued. "Zoe has been telling them you're financially reckless, that marriage will make you vulnerable, that the trust should be protected under family oversight," and my hands went cold. "Oversight," I repeated, and Elaine's voice hardened. "Control," and I stared at her, heart pounding, because suddenly the wine stain wasn't just spite, it was positioning. Zoe wanted me emotional, messy, unstable on camera, so she could point and say, "See, she can't handle anything, she needs supervision." And Elaine said quietly, "She's pushing for a conservatorship-style petition," and my chest tightened. "That's insane," I whispered, and Elaine nodded. "It's desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous," and I remembered Zoe leaning close, whispering that no one wanted me perfect anyway. The cruelty of that line now revealing its purpose. She wanted me imperfect because imperfection could be weaponized, and I sat back slowly. "They wouldn't," I said, voice trembling, and Elaine looked at me with gentle honesty. "Your mother already printed the paperwork," she said. "She didn't sign, But she didn't stop it either, and the betrayal burned hotter than the wine stain ever could, because it wasn't just Zoe, it was the family's willingness to believe. Her version of me, and I whispered, "Why would she do this?" And Elaine's eyes narrowed, "Because Zoe is in trouble," and I blinked, "What kind of trouble?" And Elaine hesitated, then said, "Debt," and the word landed like a stone, and she continued. I overheard Zoe on the phone before the ceremony. She was arguing with someone about a repayment deadline, something about, "If the trust doesn't move soon, we're finished," and my stomach lurched, because money was always the hidden engine behind family cruelty, and I realized then that Zoe hadn't ruined my dress out of pure hatred. She had ruined it because she needed me weakened, distracted, ashamed, because she needed access, and shame is a lever, and I stared at Elaine. "So what do we do?" And Elaine's voice became very calm. "We don't confront her emotionally," she said. "We let her show her hand." And I swallowed hard. "How?" And Elaine's lips tightened. "Zoe thinks she's smarter than you," she replied. "She thinks you'll stay quiet for peace," and I felt something settle inside me, heavy and clear. "She thinks wrong," I whispered, and Elaine nodded. "Tomorrow," she said, "we meet with the trust attorney and lock down every safeguard your grandmother put in place," and my pulse steadied. Because my grandmother had always been 2 steps ahead, and Zoe didn't understand that sabotage leaves evidence, and evidence creates traps, and 2 weeks might sound like time for a wound to heal, but it was also time for a plan to close, and as I looked again at the dress hanging in the closet, I understood something painfully simple. Zoe thought she stained my moment so she could take my future, but she had only illuminated her motive. And motive is what courts and contracts and truth feed on, and by the time she made her next move, she wouldn't be facing a crying bride. She would be facing a woman who had walked down the aisle through humiliation and learned exactly how to stay standing. 2 weeks passed, and Zoe acted like time could bleach intention, like enough days between the spill and the consequence would turn sabotage into a funny story, and she leaned into that narrative with practiced ease, calling relatives to check on me, dropping off flowers with notes that read, "I'm still so sorry," performing remorse the way she performed sisterhood, and my mother responded to her with relief, because my mother wanted the accident story more than she wanted the truth, and my father avoided the entire subject the way men avoid storms they helped create. But Elaine and I did not let the days soften us. We used them, quietly, carefully, because while Zoe was polishing her image, we were locking doors she didn't know existed. And on the 3rd day after the wedding, we sat in a private office with the trust attorney, reviewing every clause my grandmother had written like she was speaking from beyond the grave with a steady voice that said, "I knew," and the attorney confirmed what Elaine suspected, that the trust included strict protections against forced guardianship claims, automatic audits triggered by unauthorized petitions, and a compliance protocol that flagged anyone attempting to interfere as a potential bad actor. And hearing that made my chest loosen slightly, because my grandmother had loved me enough to anticipate wolves wearing family faces. And Elaine's eyes stayed sharp as she asked, "Has anyone attempted to file anything recently?" And the attorney's expression tightened. "There was an inquiry," he admitted, 2 days before the wedding, and my stomach dropped because Zoe's timeline was real, and he continued, "A request for preliminary documentation, framed as concern over beneficiary stability." Stability, Zoe's chosen weapon, and Elaine nodded slowly. "And if someone files that formally," she asked, "what happens?" And the attorney replied, "An automatic review begins. And the requesting party is subject to scrutiny," and I could almost hear the trap click, because Zoe thought she was setting one, but my grandmother had already laid steel beneath the floor, and Elaine looked at me afterward and said softly, "We let her file," and my pulse tightened. "Let her," I echoed, and Elaine nodded. Because the moment she tries, she exposes herself, and that was the difference between emotion and strategy. Zoe wanted me reacting, Elaine wanted Zoe recorded, and by the 10th day, Zoe made her move exactly as predicted. She invited my parents to lunch, She spoke gently about protecting family assets, about my new marriage stress, about how she just wanted to help, and my mother, desperate for someone to tell her everything was fine, listened, and my father, desperate to avoid conflict, nodded, and that afternoon Elaine forwarded me an email stamped with the court's digital header, "Petition received. Temporary oversight request," and my hands went cold as I read Zoe's words on official paper. Beneficiary shows signs of emotional instability. Recent public distress at ceremony. Requires guidance for protection of assets. And the cruelty of it burned hotter than the wine ever had, because she was using my humiliation as evidence against me. She was turning my wedding wound into a legal weapon, and Elaine's voice on the phone was calm. "Do not respond," she said. "We respond through the system." And the next morning the Trust Compliance Board issued a formal notice, not to me, to Zoe, because she had triggered the audit, and audits do not care about sisterhood, they care about contracts, and Zoe received that notice at 9:14 a.m. 2 weeks and 1 day after the wedding, and she called me within minutes, her voice high and shaking. "Lily," she cried, "what is happening?" And I let silence hold for a beat, because this was the first time she sounded like the ground was moving under her. And she whispered, "They froze everything," and I asked softly, "Everything you tried to touch?" And her breath hitched. "I was trying to help," she pleaded, and I could hear papers rustling, panic in the background. "They're calling it fraud, they're investigating me," and I pictured her opening the envelope, reading words like unauthorized interference, bad faith petition, compliance breach, and realizing her little accident had led her into a machine she couldn't charm, and she sobbed. It was supposed to be protective, and I replied quietly, "You used my wedding to paint me unstable," and she whispered, "I didn't think." And I interrupted gently, "You didn't think I'd stand," and her breathing broke. "Lily, please, tell them it was a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding again, the word people use when caught, and I leaned back, feeling no joy, only a quiet finality. "You spilled wine on my dress on purpose," I said softly, and she went silent, the denial dying in her throat because she knew I knew, and then she whispered, barely audible, "I needed the money," and there it was, the truth finally stripped of perfume, and I asked, "For what?" and she sobbed, Deadlines. I thought if I could get oversight, I could move funds. Just temporarily. Temporarily. The word thieves use to pretend theft is a loan, and I closed my eyes. Because her plan was never about helping me. It was about using me. And I said quietly, "You chose my wedding as your stage." And she choked, "I'm sorry." And for the first time, the apology sounded real, not because she felt my pain, but because she felt her consequences. And I replied softly, "You should be." And she cried, "What do I do?" And I answered honestly, "You face it." And the call ended with her sobbing into silence. And later that afternoon my mother arrived at my door trembling, holding the same compliance notice Zoe had received, her voice breaking. "I didn't know," she whispered, and I looked at her, tired. "You watched," I said quietly. "You watched her ruin my dress and asked me not to make a scene," and my mother's tears fell. I thought peace mattered, and I replied, "Peace built on my humiliation was never peace." And in the weeks that followed, Zoe's petition was dismissed, the audit uncovered her financial misconduct, and repayment agreements were enforced through legal channels, not family whispers. And my parents had to sit with the truth that the daughter they defended was the one who set fires, and I was the one who walked through smoke without burning down the house. And one evening Elaine texted me a single line, "Case closed. Trust secured," and I stood in my closet looking at the wedding dress, the stains still faintly visible beneath the alterations, and I realized it would never be perfectly white again, but neither would my blindness, and Zoe had ruined my dress on purpose. Yes, but 2 weeks later she regretted everything, not because I screamed, not because I begged, but because I stayed steady, let her reveal herself, and let the truth do what it always does, eventually spread.